Chapter 1, Part 2. Victorious Day. Finally, the posh doctor got up and smiled a watery smile. Good day, good day. But it wasn't a good day, of course, for poor Mam, and now she knew that powder she had rubbed on my aching gums had poisoned me. They went out of that bright room with news that was very black indeed. We were well and truly back in the wars, and there was nothing to cheer us about this news. The bomb that had dropped on me had left me as hollow and useless as that black bombed-out tree in our paddock. My dad walked very upright and unblinking, and Mam cried gently, holding me her sick bundle, her baby called Victoria, who would never be Victoria's. I should not have been given that name. Anyway, Mam and Dad took me home and carried on as they always did. But I don't think they prayed for me like Auntie Martha did. Well, I don't suppose Dad did, because Dad believed in his saying, God helps them that help themselves. So he just worked harder on our farm, and Mam worked harder at home in the house. Every day, Mam wrapped me up with my grey blanket, and with little Gwendy following behind, she carried me outside to our paddock to get the good fresh air. We saw our sheep that were lambing, but I didn't look at them. Then she took me back inside and tried to get me to eat, but I didn't open my mouth. She had fresh fish brought straight from Hull docks, and she boiled it in milk. Eat this, oh please eat this, she whispered. But I just lay there on our hard couch with my grey blanket over me while Mam got on with her housework. Every day she started all over again and wrapped me in my blanket and took me to the paddock to see our sheep, but I didn't look. She brought me fresh fish and boiled it again, but I didn't open my mouth. Then she got on with her housework again, with me flopping on the couch. Then one day, Mam said that when she was sweeping up our floor, a sheep came into the house. It was that black one, our only black one. It must have got through a gap in the hedge and followed us all the way back to our house from the paddock. Bah! Bah! It burst in through our door. Mam must have forgotten to shut it properly. Get out! Get out! Shoo! Shoo! Shouted Mam at the sheep. But the sheep would not go. It just turned tail and ran round my couch. Mam waved her brush, the one I was supposed to be as daft as. Go on! Go on! But that sheep just turned again and ran round again, and my Mam ran after it with a brush, chasing it. Round and round they went. Of course, Mam was mad at all the mess that the sheep was making as she ran faster and faster, waving her brush. Get out! Get out! And I suppose that must have been funny to watch, because I did something that I'd never done before. I smiled. I actually smiled. And then I smiled again and I laughed. I opened my mouth and forced out a funny, squeaky little laugh. Ha! My Mam stopped dead still with her brush in the air, and the sheep stopped dead still as well, and they turned round and they both stared at me in amazement. Mam could not believe her ears. She looked to see if anybody else had come in and made that noise. But no, it was true. It was me, and I'd never laughed before. In the end, our sheep lost interest and went out the way it had come and ran off to join its flock with a baa and a few more currants. But Mam did not lose interest, and she did not care about the mess now. Did you laugh? Did you laugh, she shouted. Do it again, do it again. I just stared at her though, not understanding. But Mam was desperate for me to laugh again. Quick as a flash, she ran round and round my couch, chasing a pretend sheep this time. She waved her brush, which is not so daft after all, and did some frantic pretend prods. But now she was running sideways so that she could watch me all the time. Round and round she went, waving and shouting and staring at me, willing me to laugh. And then I did. I laughed again. Ha, ha! I was a bit stronger this time. Then my mum came over and laughed as well, but her laugh was more like a choke and more like crying. I laughed for the third time, ha, 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 and it was like a proper laugh. Third time was lucky for me now. The next day our postman called. He was called Posty. He came early in the morning as usual on his bike from Ringham. He was the one that used to come in the war and tell us that the bombers were out. He'd got a new lamp for his bike since then, with modern batteries, and now it was much brighter and gave out light on dark mornings. No better, no better, he said, shaking his head at me on the couch. Well, I think she might be a bit better, said Mam, because she laughed yesterday, and that is surely a good sign that she might soon be well. She laughed, shouted Mam. But I don't think Posty was listening, because, as I've said, he liked bad news the best. You'd think that he would start to look on the bright side now the war was over and he'd got new bright lamps for his bike. But he did not. He'd probably got used to bad news. And people were grateful to hear what he had to say, carrying it round the villages. Everyone always listened to him eagerly. His bad news was mostly about people who were poorly and about people who had died or had fallen on hard times. I bet he liked coming to our house because there'd been a lot of bad news recently since I was born. It's not a boy, it's not a boy. She's poisoned, she's poisoned. And today he was bringing some other bad news. The roads are bad, the roads are bad, he shouted, shaking his head again. No school bus running, no school bus. It's skidded on the black ice. Well, that was bad news for our Katie. She wouldn't be able to get to school on the bus, and she liked school very much. In the end, Dad had to take her in our car, and that made him late for rounding up his sheep. They'd spent the summer eating the grass that had grown over the concrete gun stands in our far side field. But a few weeks ago, he had brought them into our paddock so he could keep an eye on them when they were lambing. If the weather was reasonable, they could have their lambs outside. But today the weather was too bad and Dad had to hurry. He would bring them into the sheep lambing pen, which he made with bales of straw, like the air raid shelter in the war. It was to keep the sheep safe and warm while they had their lambs. So when Dad got back from taking our Katie to school, he rushed off to round up his sheep and put them in the lambing pen. But something was wrong, and he burst into our house. My mum had just dressed me, and she'd also dressed Gwendy, who was now having her breakfast. I need some help, quick, shouted Dad. A sheep's missing, that black one. I can't find it anywhere, and it's due to lamb any time. Mam grabbed me up in her arms, and then she banged on the fire back for Grandma to come and keep an eye on our Gwendy. Gwendy was halfway through her breakfast. Grandma's fire was back to back with ours, and when she heard Mam banging, she knew it was an emergency. She came straight away to look after Gwendy. Then Mam snatched at my grey blanket and bundled me up in it. I could not be left. So off I went in her arms to help Dad find the sheep. Mam didn't trust anybody with looking after me when I was little. Dad ran across our paddock and Mam followed as best she could with me in her arms. The ground was frozen and hard. Then all of a sudden we saw our missing sheep with her black face stubbornly staring at the useless bombed-out tree. She must have been hiding in it. "Kibboy!" shouted Dad. "Kibboy!" Mam did not even try to correct him this time because he was not speaking properly. You see, "Kibboy" is sheep language for "come on," and my dad was the expert on all things about farm animals. But our black sheep did not come on. She took no notice of Dad, even though she would perfectly understand what he was saying. They tried to shoo her and chase her towards the shelter of bales, but she would not go. Then Dad got hold of her woolly bag, and with his strong fist he pushed and pulled her towards the safe lambing pen of straw bales, but she struggled free and ran back to the hollow tree. "Shoo, shoo," shouted Mam, but it made no difference. The black sheep would not budge. "You're as daft as a brush," shouted Dad at the sheep, but it made no difference. Every time he got her a little way down the paddock, she broke free and struggled back. Dad grabbed her again. By now, Mam was worried about me as a cold wind had got up. So she squeezed inside the bombed tree with me in her arms. She got in quite easily because the bomb had split it right down to the ground. It was dark inside, but it was dry, and Mam couldn't hear the wind anymore. But suddenly she could hear something else. "Ma, ma." It was a little lamb, and Mam bent down carefully amongst the pile of leaves, and in the dim light she could just about see that it was a black little lamb. "Ma, ma," it went again, and I laughed out loud. Ha, ha, ha. I was good at laughing now, but Dad wasn't laughing. He was outside still struggling with the mother and shouting, "You daft beggar, you daft beggar." But she wasn't so daft. She had gone into a safe hollow tree out of the cold to have her baby lamb. And our bombed out tree was not so useless after all. "In here," shouted Mam at last, and Dad peeped in, and he couldn't believe his eyes. Then the black mother sheep pushed her head inside the shelter to nuzzle her newborn baby. There was no time to lose, because even though the little lamb was inside its hollow tree, it had been a long, cold night, and she was very weak. Quick as a flash, Dad picked up the lamb and, grabbing a corner of my grey blanket, he rubbed it down with brisk, strong strokes so that it would get its blood flowing. Then, dangling the lamb by his front legs, he came across our paddock with its legs hanging down behind. Off trotted the mother, without any chasing now. She just kept smelling the black legs of her baby and anxiously followed behind Dad. When we got to the lambing pen at last, Dad carefully stood the lamb up, and all the time its mother was fussing around, and then the baby had a drink off her. So that was a good sign, and she would get well soon and soon be strong and be as good as any other lamb. And another good sign was that when we got back, I started to get a bit better as well. You see, after that, when we all went into the house to warm up, I actually drank an egg cupful of milk. It was some of the boiled milk that Mam had cooked the fish in. And soon I was eating the fish as well. My grey blanket was thrown away because it was so old and smelly, but I didn't mind one bit. I needed something brighter now. I'd started to come out of the wars, and Mam knitted me a lovely yellow blanket that was full of hope and sunshine. It was all over, and there were no more bombs to fall, and Dad and Mam sat peacefully in their chairs at the side of our fire having a mug of tea. They tried hard to help me, and at last I was getting stronger. "It's true, God helps them that helps themselves," said Dad. "How do you know it wasn't Martha's prayers?" asked Mam. But Dad didn't answer because he wasn't there. He'd gone outside to look after his animals again. Now you know how my life began and how I was poisoned and how I started to get better because of my Mam and Dad's hard work and maybe Auntie Martha's prayers, not forgetting the black sheep. But there was one trouble that had not been solved. I was not a boy, and I never would be. I was still a girl. That meant I had to help myself, like Dad said, because I believed him. I didn't mean that I thought I could help myself to actually be a boy. No, what I had to do was to try hard to be good at things. And as soon as I was old enough, I worked out a cunning plan. It was simple, really. I decided to make a what I am good at list. As I grew, I would collect things that I was good at for my list. So far, I only had one thing on it. I was good at laughing. But I was sure I would soon collect more. Then, with my long list of things I could do well, I could better myself and get on in the world, and Mam and Dad would be proud of me, even though I was not a boy. Victoria would be a good name for me after all, and I could be victorious.